Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to be open-minded without being gullible. Alright, so since starting my channel, very often I've gotten the question, how do I entertain sort of far out notions and, consider things of a spiritual nature or things that just aren't provable or verifiable? How do I explore those things without myself becoming gullible or believing in something that's outlandish or false? Because a lot of this, it's not experienceable from the mundane state of consciousness. If you're seeking enlightenment, you have to kind of, basically, whatever someone tells you about enlightenment is what you have to believe about it, because you don't have a frame of reference for knowing what that is, because you haven't experienced it yet. So the idea is, how do we become open-minded enough to be receptive to wisdom and to explore different possibilities without being gullible and naive and just being taken for a ride by various teachers? So I think that there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding open-mindedness itself. And so I just want to take a few minutes to talk about what open-mindedness is not. Like, very often people say, oh, if I'm open-minded, I'm just going to be in La La Land, my head up in the clouds. But open-mindedness is something very different when it's expressed in a positive way. All right, so open-mindedness is not believing in things that you have no proof for. So basically, you are not looking at something like, let's say that somebody believes that there's aliens that live on a planet that's a million light years away, and you have no verifiable proof for this. So you're not actually having to believe that thing to be true. You don't have to practice any kind of blind faith for this. In fact, faith in what other people say will actually keep you away from whatever is true in your own experience. Open-mindedness is also not just entertaining far-out beliefs for the sake of entertaining far-out beliefs. It's interesting to consider all the various possibilities of how reality could be or how our reality is, but that is just beyond our comprehension. But when you're actually going for seeking truth, or seeking some sort of existential knowing of yourself or experiencing of yourself, this is actually going to stand in the way if you start making up beliefs about like how you think things are in some way that's not directly experienceable to you. Also, being open-minded is not getting rid of personal standards and preferences. So while you're letting go of your beliefs in a roundabout way, like you're letting loose of how tightly you grip them, what you're not doing is you're not ignoring how you feel about things. So if you have something emotionally that you say like, oh, well, I don't like that, but maybe if I'm open-minded, I have to tolerate that thing, or maybe I should learn to like that thing. And so basically, I'm just not telling you to feel any other way than you already feel about something, but just to suspend the idea that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt what's right or wrong, or what's real and what's not real. All right, so now that we've made those clarifications about what open-mindedness is not, let's talk about what it is. And essentially, if I were to boil down what open-mindedness is extreme empiricism and honesty. So basically, you are just getting in touch with whatever's true for you right now in this moment and no other moment. And also, you want to become aware of what is a belief that you hold, whether it be true or false, and what's actual reality. You see, very often human beings, because we have a very complex intellect and we have all of these frameworks for understanding reality, it's like we miss the reality in clinging to our framework. So we want to start making a distinction between our beliefs and assumptions about reality and reality itself. And ultimately, if you start questioning these things, you'll realize just how little we can actually know about the reality that we live in. Like, we assume that we know things, but there's so much that just can't be known from within the system of reality about reality itself. Like, why is there anything here in the first place? Like, that's pretty amazing. Or why should trees be green or the sky be blue? Those things, there's no reason for them to be that way. You can't really rely on rationality to figure out why the things are the way that they are. So essentially, what you're doing in becoming open-minded is you are letting go in certainty. And that means certainty of belief and certainty of doubt too. So let's take the question, does God exist? Someone might say, oh yes, God definitely exists. Or someone might say, oh, God definitely doesn't exist. It's not real. Ultimately, on either side of the fence there, you're dealing with a certain viewpoint. You're dealing with a binary viewpoint. And what that's going to do is it's going to create resistance to the other viewpoint. And you won't be able to take reality for what it is, because then you're going to be looking for reality to match your worldview, whether you be a religious person or a non-religious person. So what you want to do is you want to be super honest and just become really aware of the fact that, hey, regardless of what my beliefs are about it, I really don't know. Now, this is difficult for most people because most people don't know how to do anything else but to be right about things. People want to feel like they have a handle on what's going on here in reality. They want to feel like they have this reality thing under control and contained, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Of course, reality is so far beyond containment and beyond understanding. And there's so much that even if we explored and explored and explored, we could just never know, just because we are finite people on the human level, and the human lens is inherently limited. So in order to be open-minded, you have to endure a certain degree of cognitive dissonance and openness to other possibilities that diverge from your worldview. Because essentially, all of the wisdom that you would ever need to have is already there inside of you. The problem is that our beliefs about things actually get in the way of that. That way, we have to repress away certain aspects of our wisdom because they're threatening to our persona and to our worldview and to the way our ego thinks that things should be. So if we take somebody who always needs proof about things and they want to be somehow verifying that what they believe about reality is true in some kind of absolute sense, oftentimes, if you're religious, you might use your religion to base your beliefs off of. You might say, oh, well, it says so in the Bible, or it says so in the Quran, or it says so in the Kabbalah, and so it's true because I take that belief to be true. That's the premise from which you're deriving truth. But how do you know that that's true? And then essentially, if you continue to ask that question, you'll basically see that you really don't know any of the things that you believe relative to that. Or if, let's say, you're a rational person and you say, well, things that are real and are true have to make sense rationally. But you want to think about rationality as being something that's pretty unique to the human lens, and that the human lens itself it's not the ultimate lens for reality, and it can't really wrap itself around reality. There's so much that we rationally can't understand. It's like one time I saw my cat, and he was standing on top of a box and he was trying to pull the cabinet open, but he was in his own way. And, it's so obvious to me as a human to look and see, oh, this cat has some blind spots about what the laws of physics are. But maybe I have similar blind spots that maybe my cat picks up on about me, and it's like, silly human, you could just be doing this and this would happen. So it's one of those things that you can never really know in any kind of measurable way that the human mind can fathom about how reality is. Also, if you're the type of person that needs scientific proof for everything, well, that's going to open up a can of worms for you, because essentially science is a very, very new form of knowing things. It's really only come about and gotten popular over the past several centuries, and so it's still in its baby phases. And so there's a limitation there in that science isn't in anywhere at its ultimate peak of being the ultimate science, but also science relies on the human lens as well. And there are some things that the human lens may just not be able to pick up on. So for example, bats have echolocation. We don't have that. We couldn't really fathom what that would be like to have echolocation. We have to kind of rely on metaphors and sort of logical understanding, but we can't really relate to that. And so when it comes to science, we're always going to be limited by our measuring tools. Essentially, anytime we go to determine whether or not something is valid or true or significant or meaningful or having a point or being worthwhile, all of those concepts belong to the human mind. Like maybe other creatures have them, maybe they don't, but basically those things don't have any real existence in reality. And so we have to acknowledge that there are so many limits to what we can know. And this is a bit taboo because we want to think that we know things. Well, human beings want to feel like they have some degree of certainty, but certainty is an illusion. There is no certainty. It doesn't matter how much you come to know, and it doesn't matter how enlightened you become. There's still going to be uncertainty there. So the thing is to release resistance to the uncertainty. Embrace the fact that you're uncertain. Be okay with not knowing something. And when you don't know something, that's when you become open to new possibilities, new ideas, creativity, and wisdom. But ultimately, as I said, everybody already has this wisdom within them. Everybody already has a connection to what's real because you are what's real. The only problem is that your identifications and your thoughts about things have convinced you that you're not. And the number one problem that I find with open-mindedness is not necessarily the unwillingness to think of different possibilities. It really is the unwillingness to be seen as somebody who thinks about possibilities that are outside of the realm of science and rationality. We have a little bit of a cultural taboo surrounding entertaining notions that don't fit with our framework that our society goes along with. And so when we see somebody who is maybe thinking outside of the box a little bit, or maybe thinking about things that are way out there, there's a judgment, there's a tendency for judgment. And I'm not saying that this tendency for judgment is completely misplaced, because a lot of times highly open-minded people who pay lip service to open-mindedness at least, they really are operating under their own brand of closed-mindedness. But they're really ungrounded in the way they're doing it. Like they don't have any kind of basis in reality. They're just believing in things that, just sound good to them. Like, oh, I think that there are aliens on this planet, or, I think that this was how this happened, when they have no proof. And again, I think adopting an attitude of extreme empiricism but extreme openness is really the best way to go about this. Because essentially, if you fall on the side of the person who identifies themselves as being grounded and rational and logical and always basing things on science, there is a degree to which they are avoiding things that fall outside of that range because they're afraid of seeming like the woo-woo people on the other side of the scale. So there's a resistance on one side of the scale to the other. A lot of the times the people who are like really woo-woo out there, maybe super hippie people, might have a bit of a resistance to seeming super logical and rigid and grounded, So like these are really just two sides to the same coin. But both of those are closed-minded because essentially those are ego identifications, and the ego is the thing that's closed-minded. What you really are underneath your ego identity is completely accepting of everything that is. It does not need it to conform to a particular worldview. It doesn't really care about the thoughts about reality. It really just accepts reality as it is. So that's an important point to remember. Just because you're somebody who thinks that you're open-minded doesn't necessarily mean that you are. And you want to really actually practice open-mindedness and see that maybe there are some ways that I'm actually being closed-minded. And someone like me, I do the same thing. I have to think maybe I'm being closed-minded because there are certain pet ideas that I have that I hold on to very tightly. They're kind of like my security blankets, my beliefs. But this is not the way that you want to hold beliefs. You want to be able to set down a belief whenever something in reality happens that doesn't conform along with it, so that you can flow with life. So you want to suspend the illusion of certainty to embrace uncertainty. All right, so a common problem that comes along with the idea of open-mindedness is that a lot of times our ego identity gets in the way. So for example, if we're the type of person who highly identifies with being a logical, rational, scientific-minded person, we might have a tendency, in order to preserve that identity as this credible person, that we might actually ignore things that are in our reality that might make us seem a little too woo-woo than we're comfortable seeming, or make us seem like we're not somebody whose word can be trusted, somebody who's delusional. And so that type of person is closed-minded in that direction, where they're not willing to really see anything outside of their worldview. Now, on the other side of the fence, there's kind of the more like a hippie subculture. There's a lot of new age people like this. And basically, this is the type of person who thinks, oh yeah, open-mindedness is excellent. That's like the number one thing. You got to be open-minded. You got to be tolerant. You got to do this. You got to do that. And ultimately, if you go a couple layers deeper, what you'll find is that type of belief is also steeped in dogma and has a very rigid worldview. The only difference is that the rigid worldview is shaped around the idea, the surface level idea of open-mindedness. And so there's still a strong belief there. And so even though a person might think, oh yeah, I think outside the box, I do this, there's a certain brand of thinking outside of the box that happens. So even though it parades itself around as open-mindedness, it's actually closed-mindedness in disguise. And so if you're the type of person that considers themselves to be an open-minded person already, I would urge you to take a look a couple layers deeper just to see how open-minded you are to things that are, let's say, maybe a bit more rigid. Are you open-minded to worldviews that are intolerant? And I don't mean in terms of accepting them and thinking that they're a good idea in society. That's not what I'm saying. But are you okay with people having a different worldview from you? Are you okay with your worldview not being correct? Because there is no correct worldview. But either way, either of these two sides of the same spectrum are not interested in the thing that really is what we're looking for, which is truth. Truth can only be found in the space of uncertainty and open-mindedness, because if you know something already, then you just have a belief, and a belief is not the truth. In order to really be open-minded and to really experience truth, you have to embrace total uncertainty. You have to let go of all of your pet beliefs or your pet disbeliefs. So don't worry about what other people think of you, and don't worry too much about what you think of yourself. You know, ultimately that's just a self-image that doesn't have anything to do with reality. Now, people are going to judge you one way or another. There is no way to go through life on this planet without being judged for absolutely everything that you do. There is no way to win that game. So stop trying to win that game already. Just be a free thinker. Don't feel the necessity to believe in something simply to uphold a self-image, or to disbelieve in something simply to uphold a self-image. Just really get honest with yourself. And that's really what it is. It's self-honesty. You know, to be open-minded means that you have to be really aware that you don't know. So there's a metaphor that I came up with for how you want to be with your open-mindedness. So with the two sides of the spectrum that I was talking about for, the hyper-rigid person, in a sense, is almost like a tree that can never quite grow because it won't allow its branches to go up into the sky, and thus the roots won't grow down into the ground, and so it'll be a very small, undeveloped tree. But if you think about the person who has the open-minded persona, you know, the ego that's open-minded as opposed to genuine open-mindedness, what you have is a person whose roots aren't even in the ground, but they're just basically floating around up in the clouds. Maybe they're branches, or they're artificially sticking them up in the clouds, but they're not actually grounded in any kind of reality. So you want to be like a very healthy, well-developed tree. You want to ground your roots very deeply in reality and become very aware of what's going on around you moment by moment, because in the present moment, that's the only place where you can actually find truth, and that's existential truth. That's not the relative truth like, oh, the moon exists or the world is round. Those are relative truths, but the truth that we're actually looking for when we're looking for truth is right here in our subjective experience. And then when you have your roots really deeply planted in reality and your branches can stretch up into the heavens and into all of the other possibilities, when you can grow yourself to a point where you can reach that height, that is when your tree starts to bear fruit for you. And that fruit is wisdom and insight. And this will give you even more ideas, or not ideas, but really insights, and that'll help your roots grow even deeper, and then your branches grow even wider. And so there's really no shortcut here. So for a person who's just adopted the open-minded persona, they're not going to be able to have that kind of growth from doing the types of inquiry that they do, because it's not rooted in reality. But also, a person who wants to be rooted in reality isn't actually rooted in real reality, because they're thinking that reality is in some scientific truth or some rational truth. So they're also not well grounded. So their tree is not going to grow either. It is going to be an undeveloped tree, and it will not bear fruit. So this is the benefit of being open-minded, is really to develop yourself, because you cannot develop yourself properly without open-mindedness. This is what allows us to access wisdom and to really be in touch with what we are. It allows us to be authentic, and it allows us also to flow with life and to enjoy life. Also, if we're too rigid and we have too much of a rigid worldview, a worldview that doesn't breathe, what will happen is that this is going to tie our hands. So let's say that I'm a person who is very, very set on the belief that being a hardworking person is the best thing that a person can do, period. And that's my belief about things. And then I go around and I judge people who aren't as hardworking, like, oh, that person, they're super lazy, or this person's this way, or this person's that way. You know, ultimately it'll cause these judgments to come up to hold such a strong belief. You know, and so that's not being open-minded. Like thinking, well, maybe hard work isn't the most important thing. Maybe it's just one thing among many things. Maybe it's just another experience. Maybe it doesn't have any value at all. Maybe value doesn't even exist or significance. But this will block you off from doing these type of inquiries, and it'll block you off from the wisdom that's naturally there. Also, like let's say you were indoctrinated to believe that the country that you're from is the best country in the world. And you really took that to heart, and you believed that, and you became identified with that. And then what that's going to do is it's going to block you off from the natural wisdom that you could just as easily have been born in any other country, and that all people are valid just for being, and that no individual culture or race has all bad people in it. These types of beliefs will block you off from natural wisdom. So this is the main problem of being closed-minded. Because when you're certain and when you're sure about something, this naturally creates blind spots to consciousness, and it keeps your awareness at a very low level, because you can't be aware of things that undermine your worldview. It's dangerous to you because you relate it to yourself. And so when there's a threat to your worldview, if you hold it too tightly, that's a threat to self. And so you have to put your blinders on. You have to repress it away. You have to ignore it and not allow it into your experience. But open-mindedness is the remedy for this. Also, open-mindedness allows you to be more sensitive. Like if you think about a person who's closed-minded as wearing an oven mitt while they pet a cat, whereas a person who's maybe a little bit more open-minded is somebody who's wearing a latex glove while wearing a cat, but somebody who's radically open-minded is somebody who wears no glove at all. They can experience reality directly, and they can pick up on so many more subtle things, you know, just by suspending belief in things. Because essentially every single moment is a new moment. Because of this fact, any type of belief or assumption that we apply over top of this new moment, that's going to cause us to not really feel it, like it's going to register to us as, oh, this has been done before, this is boring. But if you really become clear to the fact that, oh, I've never experienced any of this before, every single moment is 100% new to me, then you can experience life like a child. So open-mindedness will allow you to find hidden treasures that you didn't expect to be there, because you're looking in places that other people generally tend not to look. You know, in our culture, we get indoctrinated to think a particular way or to look in certain places for happiness. But when we're open-minded, we can say, oh, we don't really know if any of that's true, so let's just check everywhere. And so if we check everywhere, we're going to find a whole lot more than somebody who's looking in specific places. So we're also able to better integrate our shadows, and life becomes more alive. and we can really feel things in a much deeper and richer way than we're used to experiencing them. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I mean, it all comes along with it. You have to be receptive to both the things that are positive and negative, because ultimately positive and negative are just value judgments. Those are labels and they're not really real. Also, when you think about seeking the truth, I urge you to think about it more as a process than a product. So when you seek truth, you're not looking for one set right answer. In fact, there may not even be a right answer that can be known. And so enjoy the process of looking, the imagination, the thinking about things, the exploring various things. It's in that space of curiosity that wisdom can hit us. This will help us to empty the cup and to destroy our delusions. And the delusions are what cause our suffering. And so essentially, when we say, hey, I don't know any of this, all of our limiting beliefs, we could also be aware that, hey, I don't know if that's true either. And that makes it a lot easier to let go of those things. So remember, identification with open-mindedness or closed-mindedness is going to tie your hands. Just be in that space of openness. Be in that space of uncertainty. Don't need to be right. Don't need other people to be wrong. Don't try to go around and around in your head trying to reconcile your worldview with reality. The fact of the matter is that your worldview has nothing to do with reality. If we look at it, reality is 100% neutral to what we think about it. All right, so now that I've stressed the importance of open-mindedness, I'm going to give you some practical pointers for how to avoid being gullible while you're actually being open-minded. So the number one thing is to break attachments to particular identities. As I said before, everything you really need to know in terms of wisdom is already inside of you. And the only thing that blocks you from that wisdom is being identified with your identities. So as many of your identities as you can let go of when you're actually doing your contemplation or living your life or just being aware, that's going to help that wisdom pour over into your conscious mind. Because what an identity does is it's like a stopping block. It stops that wisdom from being conscious to you. You forget that you know it because it's dangerous to your worldview. So break as many attachment to your identities as you can. All right, the next thing is to be 100% honest. Even if it paints you or the things that you hold dear in a negative light, or even if it's uncomfortable for you, be 100% honest. Now, this is very difficult because the ego is set to deceive. And so that way it keeps you identified with the things that you're identified with. But you want to be 100% honest and see things very clearly without trying to distort them to match your worldview or to match your self-image. All right, the third thing is to get in touch with how little you can know. And so you might ask yourself some existential questions like, oh, why is reality here at all? Or, if I'm in this room and then I assume that the living room is still out there, but I don't really know that actually. And I can't know that because the second I go out there, I'm going to be seeing the living room and then I'm not going to know if this room exists because I'm not there. So you have to kind of consider is my being aware of something the only thing that makes things exist? And recognize it as an equally valid way to interpret your world as like thinking that things remain external to you. So think about it, you can't really know one way or another. So just ask yourself those type of questions and you can become really aware of the fact that there's so little about reality that you know. And so how could you claim to be right about anything? How could you claim that your worldview is in any way correct? You just don't know. All right, here's the next point, and I think that this is the most important thing, is you want to adopt an attitude of extreme empiricism, which means if it's not happening to you right now in the present moment, as the present moment unfolds, don't believe it. Essentially, because you can't know anything about reality at all, you don't even know if your memories match up to an actual real experience. Your memories are just thoughts that arise in the brain right now in the present moment. All you ever have is the present moment. The future doesn't exist. The past doesn't exist. And so any kind of belief that you have about the past or the future, they're beliefs. They're not the truth. And so you have to suspend those beliefs. Yeah, so don't trust your memories for giving you truth. Don't trust anything but your five senses and your awareness of your thoughts right now in the present moment. And so if you think about the main modes through which we perceive things, we have our five senses and we have our thoughts. One thing is, don't get caught up too much in the content of your thoughts. Your thought itself is real, but the content inside of it is not. And so you can recognize that, oh, in the present moment, I'm experiencing a thought, but that does not necessarily mean that thought is true or has anything to do with truth. But it is true, it's truth that right now, in the present moment, I'm having a thought. And this is what that thought is. Another way to be open-minded without being gullible is to not necessarily believe something just because somebody's an expert in the field. Essentially, you don't want to base any of your truth-seeking or any assumptions that you have on anything that you know simply from a second-hand source, no matter how credible that source is reported to be. Because essentially, you can't really know if that person's even separate from your own consciousness. You can't know that they're right. You can't experience what they experienced to come to that conclusion, or even know that they did experience it. And so you want to suspend your beliefs in that. And when I say suspend beliefs, I'm not saying, oh yeah, well that's definitely false. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying become aware of the fact that you don't know in any absolute sense as to whether that's true or false. All right, my next pointer is don't seek to confirm your worldview, and don't seek to find things and cherry pick things from reality that basically uphold your worldview and can preserve it. What you want to do is you just want to observe things as they are, and you don't want to look for things other than what is true right now. So if it's not true right now, don't go out of your way to try and confabulate a reason why it's true. Also, you want to value the process of truth-seeking and the process of questioning more than the product of getting an answer. So if you're in that state of uncertainty, don't try to become certain. Just try to stay in that kind of fuzzy area, that place where there's paradox and confusion and cognitive dissonance. Feel comfortable and feel at home in that space, because that's the space where the magic happens. If you're certain one way or another, it kills it. It goes completely dead. You will not have any kind of access to that wisdom. But if you're able to stay in that space of not knowing anything, that's where the magic is. Also, you'll want to accept the limitations of the human lens and our limitations to know anything outside of the human lens. So oftentimes we get stuck in the trap of thinking, oh yeah, human beings, we're the most intelligent, or we're the most this, we're the most that, we're the most significant or well-developed, or whatever reason we give. But ultimately, that's just a distortion. That's a very anthropocentric view of things. You want to let go of the anthropocentric view and see things like, oh, well, maybe I have this great intellect and I value intellect because I'm a human, but maybe I just value intellect because I'm a human. Maybe there's some other creature who maybe a beaver values chucking wood because it's a beaver, and they're like, oh, we're the most superior species because we chuck wood better than anybody else. Well, that might be true, but that doesn't really confer a particular value upon the beavers that are thinking that. Supposedly beavers are thinking that. I'm certain that beavers are actually thinking that. So you must understand that human beings have natural limitations to their lens. And so it's kind of like trying to load Microsoft Word into a toaster. It's just not going to work, and we are blind to our own blind spots. We can't know how little we know. Also, in order to avoid being gullible, you don't want to take your insights or your truth-seeking too seriously. You want to treat it kind of like a game. Sort of like, I'm just coming here, I'm being curious, and I'm going to take whatever I take from it, but ultimately, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. I'm not going to get super serious about any particular insight, no matter how profound it was for me on the personal level. Just don't get rigid and don't solidify it, because wisdom can't be solidified and still remain wisdom, because wisdom is something that constantly changes. So basically, you want to have a worldview that breathes, that allows for new possibilities and for you to really explore all of reality and your internal state as well, which is also part of reality. So you're going to want to hold on to your beliefs very loosely and to be able to set them down when they don't match up, because ultimately your beliefs aren't going to match up to reality past a certain point. So kind of use them almost like a knight would use his sword. You know, pick them up when they're useful, but when they're not useful, just put them in the holster. Just suspend them, forget about them. Just treat the whole thing when you're truth-seeking or when you're trying to observe something. You know, think about it all. It's like one big game. It's not that serious. What you can do is you can just play around. You know, think up all the craziest possibilities possible. You don't even have to tell anybody if you're worried about, you know, somebody thinking about you as being a woo-woo gullible person. You can just entertain them to yourself and you don't have to talk to anybody about it. And you also shouldn't be holding on to those things like they're true. So you want to have this worldview that breathes, that lets insights come in and out freely. And because wisdom is something that's constantly changing, that's what's needed to be in touch with wisdom. You have to be able to live moment by moment and to know what's worth doing and what's not worth doing in every given moment, or what's true in a particular situation but then not true in another situation. These things are always shifting around, and if we have any kind of rigidity, this is not going to serve us well in life. Alright, so that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, if you're interested in more topics like this, you know, anything having to do with the internal experience, spirituality, psychology, you know, how to bust through limiting beliefs, healing, you know, just various spiritual maps and frameworks. If that's like something that you're interested in, then this channel is going to be right up your alley. So make sure you subscribe. I'm trying to upload once a week now, so I'll be making my uploads quite a bit more frequently. But for now, that's all I have, and until next time, keep becoming more you.